My very first job was in the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk. If you've never worked for them or never worked for a Nordic company, what I'm going to say now is going to sound like absolute nonsense. Novo Nordisk had company values that were taken seriously and actually meant something. The amount of time and effort that were put into making meaningful values that permeated the company was astonishing, and they had a very real impact on how things got done in Novo. Now, the reason you most likely think nonsense is because most likely at every single company you've ever worked at, you never felt those values meant anything. They were words on a slide or something management used to explain why you didn't get a raise. I guarantee you this. There's someone watching this video who at some point has worked for a company that espoused an owner's mentality, which to them meant we pay you nothing and we expect you to work till you drop because anything else will be seen as a lack of commitment. So are companies like Novo Nordisk lone unicorns? Are values useless? And if so, why? First of all, the concept of value-based leadership is actually, relatively speaking, a new thing. The term really found its footing in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It was in response to a lot of things, including scandals like Enron, WorldCom, and others, where the focus on profit above all else had, if not collapsed, but seriously harmed some companies. For some, it hit them just in terms of short-term customer support, but for others, it led to such egregious lacks of ethics that the companies went under. Something was needed to address the criticism, but also to regulate the behavior of these mega corporations. And Q, values-based leadership, which is more than just values, but also an approach to how you run your business. It was also a response to the problem that more and more people were working on increasingly diffuse contributions to the company. In 1960, men and women worked on an assembly line. They built cars and their hands were involved in building that car. In 2005, the distance of many employees from the actual product was becoming huge. Whether you're working in QA or QC or HR or as a security engineer, your role was sometimes unclear in the bigger scheme of things. Due to the nature of especially the knowledge work career, there was this idea that people were not committed or connected as much to the company, and some way of connecting them was something they were looking for. Companies were looking for a way of instilling in people a sense of purpose, which, according to research, does actually lead to higher productivity. So this thing was necessary. Also, the complexity of leading was just much higher. It shouldn't come as a surprise that companies with very concrete jobs and operational jobs are generally less likely to be values leadership driven. If you've got a company that ships boxes like Amazon, you can measure productivity very accurately, and to a large extent, you don't need some mechanism to motivate. You just track performance against metrics. But if you're a chemist in a pharmaceutical company, how do you measure that you're inventing a new compound that might save lives? The fact is, on a day-to-day basis, you don't. Also, we can't just build an SOP for how to lead a role like that. It's nuanced, it's complicated, it's not straightforward management. It's leadership because the person doing the thing might even understand the thing better than the person doing the leading. Values-based leadership also came in part out of a Nordic or Scandinavian leadership model. I've personally worked in American companies, in Japanese companies, a German company, and Nordic companies. I vastly prefer Nordic companies on a lot of levels. In a Nordic company, I was never really worried that speaking my mind would lead to negative consequences for myself. Now, this is a commonality for a lot of Nordic firms. An openness to input, a high degree of cooperation, and a high degree of collaboration, plus a psychologically very safe environment. Not that those were the reasons the concepts caught on in other countries. It caught on mainly because Nordic companies were seen as stable. They didn't have massive ethical crises, which were relatively common in the US and Anglo-Saxon firms. They didn't have the volatility of US firms. These Nordic countries were and still are among the most productive in the world. So globally, and especially in the US, the desire to emulate those approaches, to leverage those advantages, was huge. This is a relatively new and young channel, so you are probably new here. If so, click the subscribe button. It helps the channel out massively. Thanks a ton. So why don't these values that have all these positives, psychological safety, lower turnover, increased engagement, why don't they work and why don't people believe in them? Well, it's not that complicated. So I'm an HR guy, and cue the comments of me being evil and useless in the comments. I know, just get it out of your system. It's okay, you won't write anything I haven't heard before. It's not going to be original, trust me. But I'm going to surprise you. I hate values. Well, no, I don't hate values. But if there's something that I hate more than anything is when my boss comes to me and says, we need to do a workshop to create our values for the company. These sessions are usually the biggest, most pointless, soul-destroying wastes of time. I hate them so much. And there are a couple of reasons. In a room of 5 or 10 or however many executives, you will always land on something incredibly generic. We have to have something about customer centricity in there. We have to have something about ethics. And then we have to have something about hard work or effort or commitment or how our product transforms the world. It always ends up as boilerplate generic nonsense. It's the nature of these exercises that the CEO or whoever commissioned the workshop wants the team to agree on something together, but they also don't want conflict. So everybody trends towards these not particularly controversial concepts and terms. They also do this because they have no idea why this is important, and at least 50% of the room thinks this value stuff is a waste of time because for them, business is easy. It's about making money, and management is just as easy. It's about making good people work hard and firing bad people. So what comes out is just incredibly banal. Usually, it's also a solution without a clearly defined problem. You do it because you think it might be a good thing, but fundamentally the CEO doesn't know particularly clearly what it is they're trying to fix for. So it becomes a going through the motions kind of exercise. Also, once the workshop is done, no one wants to spend money on actually making these values work. At best, there's going to be an effort to update the website with the values, write a half-hour segment for the onboarding program, and maybe also change the performance management field so that employees and managers should rate their performance based on those values. The effort to make those values live is usually close to non-existent and often half-assed at best. If Moses had made the 10 Commandments today, those 10 values would have been even more vague. They would have been decided by committee, and there would be an annual e-learning check-in if you knew them, and then nothing else. Right out of the gate, you often have a set of values that are banal and poorly thought out, written by people who don't have a clear or cohesive idea of what they're solving for, and they are more often than not willing to put the effort into making them work. But it gets worse. I've got this little question that I never share with my boss, but I share it with some of my staff. The question, which is a question about something that somebody else wants us to do, is the person asking us to solve the problem, or are they asking us to make the problem go away? Lack of diversity, inclusion, sustainability, ethical leadership. How many of you work at a company where your company's goals feel performative in nature? How many of you feel that your company is saying the things that they're expected to say without meaning it? When a giant oil company talks about working towards a greener future, when 99% of their revenue comes from fossil fuels, do you believe them? No, of course not. The fact is, these values and the workshops they spawn are a response not to a CEO or board of directors' ingrained, deeply held desire to solve a problem. They just want the problem to go away. They just want to check the box that says, yes, we are ethical, or we have ethical procedures. Whether or not they actually are ethical is not that important. I remember once an owner of a company I worked for saying to me, the only reason we don't work people harder is because we don't pay enough to get the kind of people that can handle even more work. So we're stuck with the people that want to believe that we care about their work-life balance. Now that was a cynical as hell comment. People are smart and they know how to decode when something is performative and when something isn't. In part related to the performative nature of things, but CEOs and boards latch onto easy solutions. I have spent years having to fight off amateur compensation geniuses in boards because they had read an airport book which stated that people weren't motivated by bonuses. The problem was that's not what the book said, and the research the book was based on was incredibly limited in scope. But for years, everybody was talking about how bonuses don't work. CEOs and boards have no qualms in pretending to be experts in fields they know nothing about, and leadership is a big one. People need a purpose. Start with the why. That's the level of depth they have, and that sends them in a direction. There's also the fact that some leaders are just terrible people and have terrible views of others. Right now in tech, startups, AI, there's a growing grind culture movement where startup leaders and influential people in the industry are pushing to push staff way past their limits. 70, 80, 90-hour work weeks for limited pay in the short term and only theoretical upsides in the future. The promise of something just over the horizon for a massive effort now is becoming commonplace. Not sleeping in your office? You're not dedicated. If you want work-life balance, you're a loser. These kinds of companies use values not as signifiers of virtue or rallying points for engagement. They are tools of manipulation and exploitation, which is fine to the extent that the companies are honest and upfront about what is to be expected. But it is, at its core, counter to the principles of values and values-based leadership. Very few societies that have survived for a long time have been founded entirely on principles of exploitation. The more equitable the society has been, the more prone it has been to stability and continuity. When one group got disproportionately more than the other, that lack of equity led to dissatisfaction that led to heads rolling. The problem is, in companies, people have no other recourse than to quit. And when jobs are tight and companies consolidate their power while also working to divest themselves from the need of the individual employee, the need to be equitable, reasonable, and fair is just not there. So you get some tech bros that write values that are openly exploitative and manipulative. They don't serve a higher purpose other than profit, and they don't have a purpose other than to get people to work as hard as possible for as little as possible. I know firms that have true values, that work, that drive purpose and engagement in a positive and constructive way. A lot of these companies are Nordic, but not all of them. But in general, the concept of the values-based company is exceedingly rare these days. And sure, some of them have a value of making more money, but the values of do no evil, like Google, are few and far between. For many executives, values were not something they truly understood or really believed in. After the Jack Welch era, and today especially, most CEOs don't see the company or their role as anything other than serving shareholders, which is a disinterested third party who are unaffected by the day-to-day leadership approach of a company. If stock goes up, they're happy, regardless of leadership style. CEOs and boards, to the extent that values have meaning to them, see them as a performative tool to silence critics, leverage trend with limited understanding of the usefulness of it, and even see it as a way to maximize exploitation of productivity. And in those companies, people do know. They're not stupid. They know when values truly mean something, when they mean nothing, and when they are exploitative. Their employees, funnily enough, act cynically as well. Some endure while they're at those companies, others just avoid those firms. But more than anything, they go through the motions and they adopt a transactional approach to their employer. When the employer doesn't care, then neither does and neither should the employee. Right now, values, as far as I can tell, as a management tool, are on a downturn. There's too much money in AI and other sectors to care about being well behaved. Give it a couple of years, give it a couple of scandals, and they will be back. Mark my words. So share your experiences with companies with values and those without, which ones had toxic ones and which ones really lived up to the hype. Also, remember to subscribe. See you soon.